The UK has licensed £3.3 billion in lethal arms to dictatorship Saudi Arabia, which is bombing Yemen. Evidence of the use of British-made weapons was uncovered in missile debris found by Human Rights Watch in Yemen's capital Sana'a, in a building destroyed by a bomb. The rockets used were made by American arms manufacturer Raytheon, which has a factory and 600 employees in Fife, Scotland. Britain is one of the states backing Saudi Arabia's war on Yemenis, who oppose the former Saudi-backed president. The campaign against the arms trade has now launched a judicial review on Britain's well-known arms sales to Saudi Arabia. Their spokesman, Andrew Smith, stated, "If the new government in Whitehall cares about the human rights of Yemeni people, then it must take some responsibility for what is being done with UK arms and stop arming and supporting the Saudi regime." A leading refugee agency agrees. The Norwegian Refugee Council has claimed Yemen is facing an irreversible humanitarian catastrophe after over 500 days of airstrikes by Saudi Arabia, armed and backed by Britain. 21 million people, about 80% of the Yemeni population, are now in desperate need of aid. Even now, Britain won't say if it will stop supporting the war or stop arming Saudi Arabia. Do the public still believe that Britain opposes torture and terrorism? And when it comes to war crimes, is Britain untouchable? Simple questions with important answers. Now, the UK licensed over £3 billion in lethal arms to Saudi Arabia, which is bombing Yemen. Why is Britain selling weapons to a monarchy dictatorship that bans women from driving and beheads its civilians on a weekly basis? We asked the public.
Purely balance of trade. We've got to sell goods overseas and we're not very particular about what we sell.
So you reckon it's just an economic calculation?
I think it is, yeah, absolutely. It's also the fact that I think the Middle East is seen as Saudi within the Middle East is seen as a friendly state. They're not all friendly, so I guess there's a bit of that going on too.
Probably money, I'm guessing. Finance. I can't think of any other reason. There's no other reason to do it. It's, yeah, I don't know, finance I would have said.
I mean, it's obviously just a way of generating revenue. I mean, obviously it's not a very PC thing to be doing, and I don't agree with it myself, but obviously it's a big revenue earner for us to be doing something like that, but I don't agree with it.
I guess if you look at the bigger picture, somebody's got to sell the arms to them. There's probably debates on both sides, but our arms that we sell at least are controlled, which I suppose maybe gives comfort to some people, so I think that's maybe one way of looking at it.
Is that how you see it?
I would think, personally, yes. I mean, obviously there's bad sides to everything, but we have some control on the arms we sell and we manage, so I would have a bit of faith in that.
I think it's because the higher-ups, in a way you could say they're in bed with the higher-ups in Saudi and certain other places in the Middle East. That's why they pick and choose which countries they want to bomb and which ones they want to leave, even though they're committing the same sort of crimes.
I honestly have no idea. I don't know why they're doing that. I didn't even know that was the case. And that's quite upsetting to hear, because here we have so many rights and so much freedom. I don't know why we're not allowing other people to be able to have the same rights as well. And that's not what we stand for, I don't think. So it's a shame to hear that.
The reason why Britain is arming to the teeth a monarchy that is a humanitarian stain upon the world is the reason as simple as mankind. Money, lots of money, riches beyond the dreams of avarice. At the moment, because of its given riches, Saudi Arabia just has extreme power through funding, through the UN, through NGOs, through humanitarian programs, and not least hundreds upon hundreds of millions and billions worth of arms sales. This is really the reason why Britain is supporting such a disliked, unlikable monarchy within the world. It's simply just down to money right now. If the tables were to turn and Iran, for example, became the one to go to, the tables would turn just as quickly. When it comes to loot, when it comes to money, when it comes to billions, as long as anyone is willing to foot the check, it's fair game, no matter what their humanitarian record is.
Well, Britain's arms trade with Saudi Arabia is historic and very well documented. Indeed, Britain's relationship with Saudi Arabia is one of the key reasons why Saudi Arabia, as the Saudi regime, exists. And it's irrelevant for the British government what goes on in Saudi Arabia. What's important for the British government is that the Saudi regime is beholden to the Western governments, like Britain, like USA, and they continue to buy arms and do the arms trade with British government. The Al Yamama trade deal is very well documented and worth about 40 billion over the last 20 years. And this is as part of that. They're selling weapons to the Saudi regime, which is using them to kill innocent men, women and children indiscriminately in Yemen. And the UK's obligations under the Arms Trade Treaty are just being ignored completely.
Given that Britain is arming Saudi Arabia with bombs, even though it has killed and beheaded thousands, including hundreds of children, do the public still believe that Britain opposes violence, torture and terrorism?
No, I mean, yeah, you can't argue with that. And I think for us to take the moral high ground and say, you know, we are innocent and we do nothing wrong, when you are selling to various countries, not just Saudi Arabia, lots of countries we sell arms to, and they are used for the wrong reasons. If they're used for peace and for peacekeeping, then yes, but for other reasons, when countries have poor history of looking after their own people, I think we should be questioning that.
I think that, as I said, I strongly believe that it's mainly to support the US at the moment, because, as you know, they have really problems with that Middle East. So
it doesn't fit in the slightest, but it's real politics, what the politicians call it, isn't it? So I think they're just making a value judgment, right or wrong, that they're going to sell the goods. They want to sell to a friendly state in the Middle East, so they'll keep doing it.
All of these countries, you know, they go into the Security Council with a certain policy that they aim to try and have their delegates carry out, and they purport to support these policies throughout, you know, thick and thin. But it is another matter completely when a regime is offering you a lot of money for these supplies that you're not going to be able to use for anything else.
That confuses me, because we hear so much in the media, it's bad, we're against this, and then hearing these facts and figures, it's opposing ideas, and it's who can you trust, what can you believe anymore? So that's kind of thrown me a little bit. Yeah.
Well, it's hypocritical at the end of the day. I mean, you can't preach one thing and then go and do another one. So it's completely wrong, completely wrong.
Well, it's hard to believe that Britain would be the arbiter of humanitarianism within the world when it's selling so much money to a despotic nation like Saudi Arabia. It's completely at odds with its stance around the world and how it proceeds to speak through echo chambers that it supports humanitarianism. How can it, when every Friday we know for a fact that hundreds upon hundreds of people are being beheaded, are being flogged, are being beaten and imprisoned in the name of so-called humanitarianism? It's completely at odds with the liberalism that the West espouses. And again, it's just foots the fact that if the checks will clear, if the money's good, you're willing to look the other way.
I don't think anyone anymore really believes that, which is perhaps more disturbing and even more concerning, because there used to be the argument that people don't know and people are ignorant. But in this modern age of information technology and in the news travelling so fast, and the mainstream media has lost a lot of its credibility. A lot of people get their news from alternative media, alternative news sources. So I don't think there are many people out there, very few and far between, who believe that Britain's arms trade is somehow ethical, or British foreign policy is based on human rights. This is more concerning, especially because we're supposed to be a democracy, and the amount of apathy shown by the general public to Britain's hypocritical foreign policy is very astounding, and it's very unhealthy for our politics.
The weapons which killed Yemeni children were made by American arms manufacturer Raytheon, which has a factory and hundreds of employees in Scotland. What do the public believe should happen to that manufacturer, its profits, and perhaps its directors?
They preach one thing, they say what you should do, what you shouldn't do, and then when it suits them, they go against it and they do what they want to do anyway. So it's against all ethic at the end of the day. You shouldn't be saying, oh yeah, this is what we want to, you know, this country shouldn't do that, this country shouldn't be doing that, and then they're doing exactly it anyway. They're just going against all their own morals.
I guess if you looked at it morally, like if you wanted to do the right thing, no matter the cost, you should do that. But then again it's hard, and it's also hard to regulate because we really want to have this free market with no regulations, and then comes in war and cruelty, and that's a hard thing to put into politics and economics.
Not if they haven't broken UK law. I think there's a difference between a legal argument and a moral argument, particularly in a politician's eyes.
What do you think the moral position is?
Well, I think in the best world we could ever have, we wouldn't make weapons of mass destruction. We wouldn't be selling arms to states that didn't use them responsibly. In fact, we wouldn't be selling them at all.
Again, you have to look at who authorised the sale, and that's obviously the British government, as many other Western governments have done. And to that extent, what can you really do? Can you really go around demanding remunerations from every single large government? I think the answer to that is no.
I think they should see the market and see the people they're selling to, what are their beliefs, what they're going to actually be using them for, instead of just willy-nilly giving them up to whoever just to make a bit of money. I think we need to have some morals when we trade with certain countries.
Well, this is a really complicated question. Unfortunately, given the nature of capitalism, given the nature of the world, it's very hard to demand a private enterprise stops its activities. From the perspective of a private enterprise, there's money to be made, and sometimes that just gets in the way of its objectives on a humanitarian basis. What the world can do, though, is to provide greater insight and transparency upon their activities. If the public knows what's going on, they then have a foot to stand on in terms of boycotting, in terms of providing any kind of divestment or attacking that firm. But if you don't know the name of the entity, if you don't know what they're up to, how can you protest it? Reason for this is the Saudis are controlling, through millions upon millions of investment, the narrative that social media and media is espousing regarding this. So the common man on the street just isn't going to know what this agency is doing, what they're up to, and as long as that continues, the public has no say. Now, from their perspective, the fact that they're just out to make money, and this is a money-making enterprise, you can't really criticise that because that's what they're here for. However, you can hold them to account, at least to get from their words some sort of explanation. That's all we can really do at this stage, but to do that, people need to know what they're up to.
Well, what should happen is people who manufacture these kind of weapons and then lobby governments to sell them to, unscrupulous characters like the Saudi regime and the Israeli regime as well. They should be taken to court for war crimes, but that's never going to happen because the governments themselves, the authorities who are supposed to be keeping an eye on this, who are supposed to be controlling these kind of weapons, they're part and parcel of this. You know, they're making money off the back of these trade deals through kickbacks, slush funds, and when they retire, ministers, etc., they go on to become directors and non-executive position holders, and etc., etc. So it's all one big revolving door system that they've got, and the military-industrial complex is very well entrenched now in most countries in Western Europe and as well as the United States.
The Human Rights Watch report focused on 13 separate attacks on Yemeni civilian areas. The British weapons had been used to kill 130 people, including many children. The campaigning group has described the bombings of Saudi Arabia and its allies as war crimes, adding to the human misery already being suffered by the Yemeni people. Human Rights Watch has described the bombings by Saudi Arabia and its allies as war crimes. Do the public think Britain will be punished for aiding these war crimes? Or is Britain untouchable?
Well, again, I mean, it's all the countries with a veto in the Security Council, isn't it? For a long, long time, they've been, as you said, untouchable. you can't really demand much from them, because if you try and pass anything through the UN, they can strike it down without lifting a finger. So it is very hard to call them anything but untouchable.
Untouchable, aren't we? We're always going to be untouchable, yeah, I'm guessing. I mean, I don't know, obviously, all the facts and all what's right and wrong. I mean, you hear so many different stories on there's always all different sides to the stories, but we do come across as being untouchable, like America, I suppose.
I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not sure. I don't know. I think if Britain's got nothing to hide, then it should go to The Hague. And if we sold them thinking that they were used for defence or something and not to be used against civilians, then why would you not go to The Hague and defend yourself and say, look, we sold arms because we thought they were using them for defence and for defence purposes? That's fair enough. So you shouldn't hide from that. So why shouldn't we go, I guess?
The US is untouchable, and since the UK is like allies with the US, in our way it's untouchable too. But I think it needs sanctions to be taken. I mean, if the powerful countries don't get sanctioned by these things, absolutely, that's the example you give to the rest of countries. So I think a sanction should be applied. But in practice, I doubt that this will happen.
I think we're untouchable because we have so much power. I also think, as a member of the public, I didn't really have much knowledge of this. So I don't feel we should be held accountable because even the British aren't being educated as much. So no, I don't think we should, but I think our government should.
Well, I wouldn't say Britain is completely untouchable, but we are far way along from holding them to account in any shape or form. A recent example of this is the fact that the UN itself has mandated what's happening in Yemen as being essentially a humanitarian crisis. They've highlighted the fact that 2,900 at least people have died, that at least 23 million require humanitarian assistance of some kind. We need to see the pictures, we need to see the documentation in the mass media, we need to know what's going on, and then I firmly believe that Britons will want to protest what's going on, and then the government can be held to account. As long as there is ignorance within the press, whether through a Saudi intervention or otherwise, Britain does in fact remain untouchable. Needn't need to be the way, but there's work to be done within the media and people at large to inform themselves before we can even think about holding them to account.
Well, we know the War Crimes Tribunal is for people of the right skin colour. I don't think the British government falls into that category. We've seen with Tony Blair and his war crimes. A War Crimes Tribunal is very, very unlikely. These war crimes are being committed under the umbrella of British and American diplomatic and political support. And like Saddam Hussein in Iraq, they were selling weapons to him when he was committing war crimes against his own people, crimes against humanity. He was committing genocide, mass slaughter. And the Saudis are doing exactly the same under this umbrella of diplomatic and political support from the US and from the UK and the rest of Europe as well, frankly. It's the old hedging the bets with the UK. What they do is they supply you with weapons and they let you kill as many people as you want, but they also provide political asylum to dissidents who disagree with you. And when the time is right and the British public or the general public or the mainstream media or the powers that be want to get rid of the Saudi regime, like they wanted to get rid of the Saddam regime, all these political dissidents will then become agents of the British, of the Americans, of the Western forces, and will become future prime ministers and ministers, etc., etc.
Over 20 million people in Yemen desperately need humanitarian aid. Why are the British government and British media so silent about this humanitarian crisis if they care about human rights?
I can answer that really. I think that's something for the Department for Overseas Aid, the Foreign Office. It's something that I don't know why they're silent. I think they are treading that fine line between supporting governments financially and militarily that they deem to be friendly, and as part of that wider strategic regional thing. And sadly, I think real people get caught in that.
Well, it is tough, isn't it? It's tough to know why every one of the humanitarian crises in the world aren't being covered 24/7 when such banal pieces of news do tend to populate our media. But I suppose it's what sells.
Well, I think it's been a lot of focus on obviously Syria and the atrocities that's happening with that. So obviously there are other countries, African countries, as you said, Yemen as well, which go under the radar. And I don't know the reasons for that. Maybe the displacement of the Syrian population is sort of almost more international global news rather than Yemen. I don't know the reasons why. Again, it just seems as though the media generally will focus on certain topics and will overlook others. But I don't understand why, personally.
It's kind of a loophole. It's like they're kind of masking that side of it and just showing us all what the great things they do and hiding away the evil. I think they're just doing that to make themselves look good, and they hope that members of the population don't really know the facts and figures that you're telling us right now. So it's a shame.
Because, you know, all the humanitarian discourse is sad to say that, but just when the interests of a country are at stake and at risk is when they intervene. And that's actually sadly what we are looking at in Syria as well. Non-country has moved action because the interests are not at stake, as it was in Libya, for example. That is when actually they intervened. So I think that since the national interests here are not at stake, that's the main reason why it's everything an image, like a mask, but in the real practice they are not doing anything. That's my opinion.
Well, the British government, for one, is silent simply because there's money to be made. Saudi Arabia is footing the bill for weapons at the moment, extremely lucrative deals, extremely profitable deals, and they've shown an inclination to remonstrate extremely angrily and back out of deals and promises if they are challenged. So from the perspective of the British government, unfortunately, they're quite content to turn a blind eye to the humanitarian crisis because of the money and the deals that are there to be made. That doesn't, get them off the hook by any measure whatsoever.
The mainstream media doesn't care because these people, they don't count. The mainstream media has its own narrative to push. Had these been Israelis being bombed by the Saudi Air Force, we'd never hear the end of it. But that's not the case. These are Yemeni people and no one cares about them. That's the impression that at least I get, and many people get that impression. The mainstream media is obviously pushing its own agenda. The British government, like I said before, has a strategic interest in maintaining the Saudi regime and keeping it on side, and so any genocide or mass slaughter that it is committing is completely blindsided and ignored by the British government. What's important is how to counteract that. We need to increase the pressure, we need to increase the awareness, we need to make sure that our MPs are lobbying the Foreign Office to ask questions, serious questions, about how Britain can ignore its obligations under the Arms Trade Treaty and supply this many weapons to Saudi Arabia for what is basically bombing unarmed and helpless people in Yemen, and hope that this can bring about some change in British foreign policy.
Human Rights Watch has offered evidence to show UK arms have been used to bomb Yemeni civilians. Yet the British government has failed to respond to the severe allegations directly, choosing, as usual, to dodge the charges against it. However, the evidence is compelling and deals a spectacular blow to the UK's claims that it opposes violence, torture and terrorism, especially in the Middle East. The British message seems to be do as I say, not as I do, a position which carries little moral credibility or none at all.